Hello, everyone, and welcome to this history segment of the podcast. This episode and the other history episodes following it are going to be a bit different from the ones I've previously done. In the past, I've kind of jumped around back and forth from different civilizations and picking very specific things and making episodes about them. You can think of this episode as being the origin of the history segment's first series. They're going to follow a theme and flow from one into the other. You may be asking yourself, Ryan, what's the theme going to be? Well, other than this being a history segment to give you a hint, the theme and the story I'm going to be telling is a pretty grand one. It's the story of civilization. To be more specific, it's Will Durant's Story of Civilization, Volume 1, Our Oriental Heritage. This is the collection of books that this series will be based off of. In this volume of the series, we're going to be going over Sumeria, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Judeans, the Persians, India, China, Japan. In general terms, the Far East and Middle East. I'm going to be blunt at this point and warn you ahead of time that if you aren't very interested in history, this series is probably going to bore you compared to my previous history episodes. The book I'm going off of is over 1,000 pages long. I'm using the audiobook, and there's 50 hours of information in this single volume. There's a total of 11 volumes in Will Durant's Story of Civilization. All of these books are insanely detailed and dense. I'm going to try my best in picking out all of the main points and then doing what I do best, which is chopping down tons of information while still being accurate and informational so it can be more palpable. If you do want all the little details that I'm more than likely going to cut out, then please feel free to purchase the book and read it or listen to it for yourselves. This book was published in 1935, with the final one being published in 1975. So while it is a little older, it's still hailed as one of the greatest comprehensive set of books to talk about the history of civilization. With this preface and semi-warning out of the way, let's get to the episode. The building blocks of civilization. So, what are the conditions a group of people need to meet in order to be classified as civilization? Well, civilization as defined by Will Durant is social order promoting cultural creation. There are 4 elements that make up what we call civilization. Number 1, economic provision. Basically, how we make money and use it to prepare for the uncertain. Number 2, political organization. Number 3, moral traditions, whatever those may be as decided by a group of people. And number 4, the pursuit of knowledge and the arts. Civilization can begin when chaos and insecurity ends, because when people can overcome their fear of the unknown, we're allowed to be curious and constructive. And with our natural curiosity, we start to gain bit by bit a better understanding of life and can start to develop an actual life worth living. There are also factors at play that condition civilization. They may speed up the process or slow it down. First of these factors are geological conditions. Mankind happens between ice ages, and at any time this world can freeze up and cover the work of man with ice and reduce life to a smaller portion of the earth. Or perhaps earthquakes that can swallow towns whole and return us back to the earth indifferently. It could be a volcano that decides to spit its fiery breath and freeze a civilization in place, permanently encasing it in ash. And it could even be a tsunami that may decide one day to wipe out a city whole and return the land to a clean slate. Second are geographic conditions, such as the heat of the tropics and the parasites that infest them, or the frozen tundras of the Arctic and the mighty beasts that inhabit them. These are all examples of a hindrance to the development of civilization. They might not stop the development completely, but they definitely don't help it. At any point in time, the winds may shift and the uncaring elements can turn regions that once flourished beautifully, such as the great city of Babylon, and condemn it to desiccation, where they'll eventually wither away into a shell of its former glory. But geography can also offer up the opportunity of swift strength and wealth. If your soil is rich with food and minerals, or if you have rivers to offer themselves up as an easy way to travel and exchange goods, or if your coastline has natural harbors in it to house commercial fleets, or, most importantly, if your nation just happens to be near the world's trade routes, like Athens, Carthage, Florence, or Venice, then geography, while it can't inherently create or destroy civilization, it can most certainly smile upon it and nourish it. Economic conditions are even more important. A group of people can have ordered institutions, a moral code, and even a flair for the minor forms of art. But if it remains in the hunting stage, if a group's existence depends on luck and the hunt, it'll never really develop from barbarism into civilization. A nomadic group of people can be intelligent and have high qualities of character, such as courage, generosity, and nobility. But without continuity of food, that people's intelligence will be spent on the perils of the hunt and the tricks of the trade, with not much else to remain for the frills, embellishments, arts, and comforts of civilization. It can be said that the first form of culture is agriculture. When people settle down and till the earth and make preparations for the uncertain future, it is only then that they can find time and reason to be civilized. In their little bubble of security, with a reliable food supply and water, they can build their huts, villages, temples, and schools. They have time to invent productive tools and domesticate animals, and ultimately, themselves. They learn to work with regularity and order, and develop a type of schedule, oftentimes live a longer life, and can pass down more completely and effectively than before the mental and moral heritage and teachings of their people. Culture suggests agriculture, but civilization implies the city. In one aspect, civilization is the habit of civility, and civility is the refinement which townsmen believed could only happen in the city. Because in the city, whether right or wrong, the wealth and brains produced in the countryside are gathered there. In the city, invention and industry multiply comfort, luxury, and leisure. In cities, traders meet and barter goods and ideas, and in those exchanges between minds, intelligence is expanded, sharpened, and stimulated with creative power. In the city, some people are set aside and no longer need to produce material goods, and instead they produce science, philosophy, literature, and art. Civilization buds in the peasant's hut, but only truly blossoms in the towns. There are no racial conditions to civilization. It can appear on any continent and in any color. There is no great race that makes civilization, but in fact a great civilization that makes the people. Circumstances, geographical and economic, create a culture, and the culture creates a type. An Englishman doesn't make British civilization. British civilization makes the Englishman. If he carries that with him wherever he goes, and let's say he ends up in Egypt, he isn't creating his civilization there anew, but instead acknowledging that no matter where he is, the grasp that his civilization has over him. The only way civilization is related to race is that it is often preceded by the slow intermarriage of different people and then their gradual assimilation into a relatively homogeneous people. Subtle psychological factors also come into play. There has to be some kind of political order, even if it's close to chaos. People have to feel like there's more to life than death and taxes, and there has to be some kind of unity in language to facilitate the exchange of ideas. through church or school or family or otherwise, there has to be some unifying moral code, some rules to this game of life that we're playing that are acknowledged even by those who break those rules, so that they can establish some form of order and regularity, some kind of direction and stimulus for the people. Finally, there has to be education, some technique, however primitive, for the transmission of culture, whether through imitation, initiation, or instruction. If it's from your mom, your dad, teacher, or spiritual leader, the lore and heritage of that people, its language, knowledge, morals, manners, technology, and arts has to be passed down to the next generation. Because these are the things that separate us from the animals. The disappearance of these conditions, sometimes even one of them, is enough to destroy a civilization. A geological cataclysm, like the eruption of Pompeii, or an epidemic like the Black Death, an irresponsible abuse of the land making the ground unfertile, the failure of natural resources, a change in trade routes leaving a nation to fend for itself, mental or moral decay from the strains, stimuli, and contacts of urban life, from the breakdown of social discipline and an inability to replace it, the decay of leadership, a greedy concentration of wealth leading to class wars, revolutions, and eventually financial exhaustion. These are some of the ways a civilization may die. The fall of Rome and Macedonia come to mind. Civilization isn't something innate and immortal. It has to be picked up by every generation and maintained. Any serious interruptions in these conditions can bring a civilization to its end. Mankind is only separated from animals by our education, our brains. Civilizations are the concerted effort of generations of people, with family rearing and writing, binding generations together, the pass down of information from the dying to the young. Print and commerce and 1,000 ways of communication may bind the civilizations together and preserve for future cultures all that was of value to us. Before we die, be sure to gather up your heritage, stories, and knowledge and pass it down to our children and future children. Well, that concludes this history segment and episode 1 of this series. I hope you liked it and found it somewhat entertaining. Like I mentioned at the start, this is the building blocks of civilization, and every episode in this series from here on out is going to keep building on top of that. If you enjoyed it, please like, rate, and share this podcast with anyone you think might be interested in it. Like I said, this is a really dense book, and I honestly don't know how many episodes it's going to take to finish it. But I'd like to thank you again for listening to this episode, and I hope you tune in to the next one.